A judge insults Karoline Leavitt in open court. Minutes later, she has him in handcuffs. You won't believe what just happened. Karoline Leavitt was no stranger to pressure. For years she had navigated complex legal cases, but today was different. As she stepped into Judge Howard Gates's courtroom, she could feel the tension. Judge Gates was known for his sharp tongue and harsh rulings. This wasn't just another hearing. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. The case involved a high-stakes, government ethics violation. A wealthy developer with political connections was accused of funneling state funds into his private ventures. The evidence was strong, and Leavitt had prepared her arguments meticulously. However, nothing could have prepared her for the hostility in Judge Gates' courtroom. As Leavitt approached the plaintiff's table, the air was thick with tension. Judge Gates didn't even look at her. Instead, he flipped through a file, his movements slow and calculated, as if to show his disdain for the proceedings. The courtroom was silent, an intentional silence designed to intimidate. Finally, Judge Gates broke the silence. "Miss Leavitt," he drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I assume you've prepared something with substance today, or should we just skip ahead to the part where you waste my time?" A few muffled chuckles echoed from the back of the courtroom. Leavitt's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She had faced worse than a condescending judge. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I believe the evidence will speak for itself. This case involves the misuse of taxpayer dollars, and my job is to ensure the facts are presented accurately." Judge Gates leaned back in his chair, his expression one of feigned boredom. "Taxpayer dollars, right? Because that's never been the foundation of a frivolous case before," he said. Leavitt's jaw tightened, but she remained composed, ready for whatever came next. Leavitt's tone remained steady. "With respect, Your Honor, I would hardly call felony corruption charges frivolous." For a brief moment, their eyes locked, his cold and calculating, hers unwavering. But before she could continue, he cut her off again. "Miss Leavitt, spare me the lectures. Just get to the point. I don't have all day to entertain whatever grandstanding you have planned." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The courtroom wasn't packed, but those present sensed something was off. Judges could be tough, but this felt personal. Karoline took a slow breath, recalibrating. She knew what was happening. Gates wanted her off balance to control the tempo and put her on the defensive, but she wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. She picked up a folder from the table, flipping it open with deliberate precision. "Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A. These financial records clearly demonstrate..." "Do you always insist on drowning people in paperwork?" Gates interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or is this just your way of compensating?" The shift in the room was instant. The defense attorney smirked, and a few reporters in the gallery exchanged glances. But Leavitt didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that men like Judge Gates thrived on intimidation. The only way to beat them was to never let them see you rattled. She paused, ready to continue. She paused long enough to make a statement without speaking. Then, her voice steady and unyielding, she set the folder down and clasped her hands together. Her gaze was steady and unflinching. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but firm, "if you prefer to continue making this personal, I'm happy to request a recess while we address any professional concerns you may have." It was subtle, not aggressive or disrespectful, but pointed, a clear warning that she wasn't going to back down. The judge's lips curled slightly. Was it amusement or annoyance? It was hard to tell, but he wasn't done yet. "Oh, I don't have concerns, Miss Leavitt," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I just know a weak case when I see one." This time, the reaction wasn't just murmurs. A few gasps escaped from the gallery. Someone whispered under their breath. This wasn't how a judge was supposed to conduct a hearing. Karoline could feel the weight of the room shifting. Eyes darted between her and Gates like a tense tennis match, but she wasn't going to engage in a shouting match. That's what he wanted. Instead, she adjusted her blazer, straightened a few papers, and looked him dead in the eye. "I suppose we should let the evidence do the talking," she said, her voice steady. But as she spoke, she caught something in his expression, not just arrogance or condescension, but a flicker of something deeper. It was like a man who had a stake in the outcome of this case. That's when she knew this wasn't just about courtroom theatrics. Judge Gates wasn't being combative for sport. He had something to hide. But what he didn't know was that so did she. Karoline Leavitt had been in plenty of tense hearings before, but this was different. Judge Gates wasn't just ruling from the bench. He was playing a game, a calculated, deliberate attempt to undermine her in front of the entire courtroom. But why? She could feel the weight of his stare as she moved, as she presented her arguments. She could sense Judge Gates waiting to pounce. She saw the slight curl of his lips and the slow tap of his fingers on the bench, as if daring her to continue. She wasn't about to stop. "Your Honor," she continued, her tone measured, "these documents show a clear discrepancy in the funding allocations. The defendant's company received nearly triple the amount approved in the original budget, and none of it was accounted for in the state records." She turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room, but her focus remained sharp. She gestured toward the projection screen displaying the financial statements. "Now, if you look here, Miss Leavitt," Gates cut in, his voice carrying that same smug edge. "I hate to interrupt your presentation, really I do, but I think we've seen enough numbers for one day." Leavitt glanced at him, then back at the screen. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Your Honor, with all due respect," she said, her tone firm, "these numbers are the foundation of the case." "Right," he scoffed, leaning back in his chair, "and yet I fail to see anything that justifies wasting the court's time like this." There it was again. That phrase, wasting time. He was trying to bury this case before it even got off the ground. She heard a soft rustle behind her, the sound of the prosecution team shifting and exchanging looks. They felt it too. Something wasn't right. Leavitt tightened her grip on her pen, flipping to the next page in her file. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit a motion." "Denied," he snapped, silencing her. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "I haven't even stated the motion yet." "And yet," Gates said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the bench, "I can already tell you it's going nowhere. Let's be honest, Miss Leavitt, this entire case is built on speculation. A little creative accounting and suddenly you're crying corruption." The defense attorney, a middle-aged man in a navy suit, smirked. He hadn't had to say a word. Gates was doing all the work for him. Leavitt exhaled slowly, her voice steady but sharp. "Your Honor, are you refusing to allow my motion before even hearing its contents?" There was a pause, a beat too long. Then Gates, he leaned back, his voice dripping with disdain. "I'm refusing to indulge this circus act any longer." The courtroom wasn't just tense now, it was shifting. Eyes darted, heads turned, and even the reporters in the back scribbled faster, their pens scratching furiously against their notepads. Leavitt caught the glance of a juror, a woman in her 50s wearing a dark blazer. The woman's brows were furrowed, her lips pressed together. She wasn't the only one taking notice. The problem with arrogance is that it makes people pay attention. Leavitt squared her shoulders, her voice calm but resolute. "Very well, Your Honor. Then let's proceed with the next piece of evidence." She turned back to the screen, her movements deliberate, her resolve unshaken. She clicked to the next slide, her voice steady, but carrying a new edge. "This document, obtained through a subpoena, shows that..." The tone was different this time. She stopped and looked at him. Judge Gates was no longer leaning back in his chair, no longer wearing that smug expression. His hands were clasped now, his mouth a thin, hard line. Something had changed. She approached the bench. It wasn't a request. She hesitated, then set her papers down and walked toward him. The courtroom hushed as she reached the bench. He lowered his voice just enough so only she could hear. "I'd strongly suggest you reconsider the direction you're taking here, Miss Leavitt." She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Excuse me. I'm saying," he murmured, his tone icy, "that some fights aren't worth having." She let that sit in the air between them, then slowly and deliberately leaned in just an inch closer. "I don't scare easily, Judge Gates." A muscle in his jaw twitched. She turned and walked back to her table. That moment told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just a power move, it was a warning, a veiled threat disguised as judicial authority. But why? When Leavitt walked into the courtroom, she expected pushback, maybe even hostility. But this was something deeper. Judge Gates wasn't just biased, he was protecting something or someone. She adjusted a stack of papers, keeping her expression neutral. The prosecution team beside her shifted, waiting for her to react. She didn't. Not yet. Instead, she lifted her chin and faced the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to continue presenting my evidence." Gates didn't respond immediately. He let the silence linger as if deciding how far he wanted to push. Finally, he said, "Proceed, but keep it brief." Leavitt didn't acknowledge the jab. She simply reached for the next file. "This document is a contract signed between the defendant and the city's planning board, outlining the proposed project expenses. You'll notice the listed cost total is just over $2 million. She paused, then with deliberate precision placed another sheet on the projector. "However, this is an internal ledger from the defendant's company, showing that the actual funds transferred were nearly double that amount." She placed a third document down. "And here is the approval signature signed off by—" She hesitated, letting the weight of the moment land. "Judge Howard Gates." The courtroom didn't just shift, it cracked. A ripple of movement spread, eyes darting, pens scratching. The defense attorney stiffened, his smug expression wiped clean. Judge Gates didn't move. For the first time since she had stepped into the courtroom, his face was unreadable. Leavitt let the silence hang for a moment longer, then continued. "Your Honor, would you like to explain why your signature appears on an unauthorized financial transaction involving the defendant?" It was a calculated risk. She didn't have the full story yet, but what she did have was enough to shake the foundation beneath him. Gates finally moved, shifting slightly in his seat, his fingers pressed together, his knuckles whitened as he gripped the document. "That document," he said slowly, "is inadmissible." Leavitt tilted her head. "How so?" "It was obtained improperly," he stated. She let that sink in. "Your Honor, this document was subpoenaed by my office." His nostrils flared. "Then it was mishandled. I'm ruling it inadmissible. It will not be considered by this court." This time the shift wasn't just in the gallery, it was everywhere. The jury, the stenographer, even the bailiff, everyone was watching. Leavitt crossed her arms, her tone calm but cutting. "You do realize this is a public hearing, correct? That the media is here? That every single person in this room just saw you declare critical financial evidence inadmissible without reason?" A muscle in his jaw jumped. "That's enough, Miss Leavitt." She didn't move or blink. Then slowly, she sat down. That's when she did something that changed everything. She reached into her case and pulled out a small recorder, placing it on the table. She pressed play. A voice filled the courtroom, low, gruff, unmistakable. "Take care of it, I don't care how." The recording crackled, then continued. "Make sure she doesn't get her hands on those ledgers." Absolute, suffocating silence followed. Judge Gates didn't move or breathe. Leavitt didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Now every single person in the room had heard him, and the real game was about to begin. The recording ended, leaving nothing but thick, suffocating silence in its wake. No murmurs, no whispered speculation, just a stunned collective realization. Judge Howard Gates had just been caught. Leavitt didn't move. She kept her eyes fixed on the recorder, as if daring him to challenge what had just been revealed. But he didn't. Across the courtroom, the defense attorney finally blinked, his composure slipping. The smirk was gone, replaced by something closer to dread. He glanced at his client, the wealthy developer whose empire had been built on backroom deals and political favors. The man looked pale. Judge Gates cleared his throat, his voice strained. "Miss Leavitt, I don't know where you obtained that recording, but that's not the question." "You should be asking, Your Honor," she interrupted, her voice unwavering. "The real question is, who are you talking to?" His fingers curled into fists. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "This entire hearing is descending into chaos because of your grandstanding." "Chaos?" Leavitt repeated, her tone light, almost amused. "I'd say this is clarity. Finally, we have some transparency in this courtroom." The tension rose another notch. Leavitt let the moment breathe, letting him sweat. Then she reached for another document and slid it across the table. "Your Honor, this is a transcript of a wiretap, legally obtained during our investigation." She tapped the top of the page. "It corroborates everything you just heard on that recording." Judge Gates stared at the page but didn't touch it. His chest rose and fell, his breathing suddenly louder and more pronounced. Leavitt turned slightly, looking toward the bailiff. "Officer Reynolds, would you kindly read the highlighted section aloud?" The bailiff hesitated, then picked up the transcript. His voice was steady, but the weight of the words made the room feel smaller. "We'll take care of her. Leavitt doesn't have anything solid yet, but if she does, I'll make sure it never sees the inside of a courtroom." A sharp inhale came from someone in the gallery. Leavitt folded her hands together. "I'd like to submit this as evidence, Your Honor." Judge Gates's eyes flickered toward the side exit. A tiny movement, but enough for the room to realize that. For the first time, the man who had seemed untouchable was anything but. He was thinking about something other than his own arrogance now. He was thinking about escape. But it was far too late for that. "Motion denied," he barked, his voice sharp but carrying a faint tremor. Leavitt raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "This hearing is over." Gates continued, his voice a fraction too loud, as if volume could mask his desperation. "I will not allow," Leavitt said smoothly, cutting him off. "I wasn't asking for your permission." Then she did it, the move she'd been waiting for. She turned toward the back of the courtroom and gave the smallest, subtlest nod. A door opened, and footsteps echoed against the polished floor. A firm, authoritative voice announced, "Judge Howard Gates, you are under arrest." Gasps erupted from every corner of the room. Reporters fumbled for their phones, cameras clicked, and the jury gaped. Even the defendant, the powerful man who had expected this trial to be nothing more than a formality, looked genuinely stunned. Judge Gates didn't turn or speak. He just sat there, eyes fixed on a single point on his bench, as if he could make everything disappear if he just didn't move. But reality had already caught up with him. Karoline Leavitt remained seated as two uniformed officers flanked the judge. One reached for his arm, the other pulled out a set of cuffs. "This is absurd," Gates muttered, though the fight had already drained from his voice. The officer didn't blink. "You have the right to remain silent." But for the first time in his career, Judge Howard Gates actually was. The sound of metal clicking shut was deafening. The cuffs locked around Gates's wrists, sealing his fate in front of the very people he had spent years ruling over. The once commanding figure behind the bench now sat frozen, his expression a mask of disbelief. The courtroom erupted into stunned murmurs, disbelief crackling through the air like electricity. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their hands moving furiously across their notepads. Even the jury, bound by their duty to remain impartial, couldn't hide their shock. Karoline Leavitt stayed seated, her face was unreadable. This wasn't about gloating or revenge, this was about justice. Judge Gates finally found his voice. "You can't do this," he said, his words low, almost a whisper, as if he himself didn't believe them. The officer holding his arm didn't flinch. "Sir, you are being taken into custody for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of judicial power. You'll have your chance to speak with an attorney." Gates yanked against the cuffs, his face flushing. "This is a disgrace. I'm the law in this courtroom." Leavitt finally stood, straightening her blazer. "Not anymore." His head snapped toward her. For the first time, the arrogance had been replaced by something else, something closer to fear. The officers pulled him to his feet, but he resisted. This is political," he stammered. Leavitt shook her head. "This is accountability." The room went dead silent again. A lifetime of unchecked power, gone in an instant. Gates's face twisted, his jaw clenching as he turned to the gallery. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for an ally, someone who would stand up and declare this a mistake. But no one moved, because it wasn't a mistake. A few feet away, the defense attorney had gone ghost white. The developer, the man who had thought his influence could shield him, wasn't faring much better. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, his breathing shallow. Leavitt let her eyes linger on him for just a second before turning back to the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and measured. "If you have anything to say, I'd suggest you save it for your arraignment." Gates's mouth opened, then shut, because there was nothing left to say. The officers began escorting him toward the side exit, but before they could reach the door, the developer finally found his voice. Wait. His chair scraped against the floor as he shot up, his eyes darting between Gates and Leavitt. "This is getting out of hand. We can work something out." Leavitt, she turned, arching an eyebrow. "Work something out?" The man swallowed visibly, unraveling. I mean, there's no need for this kind of public spectacle," the developer, Charles Lawson, said, his voice strained but trying to sound reasonable. "Let's be reasonable." Leavitt studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp and unyielding. Then she took a step forward. "You seem nervous, Mr. Lawson." His mouth opened, but no words came. She tilted her head, her tone calm but cutting. "Why would that be?" He shook his head, forcing a laugh. "Nervous? No, this is insane. You don't seriously believe Gates is guilty, do you?" Leavitt let the question hang in the air, the weight of it pressing down on the room. Then she spoke, her voice steady. "Do you?" Silence. The officers moved again, leading Gates through the door. The moment it shut behind him, the weight of the moment settled over the courtroom like a thick fog. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was the unraveling of a system that had been protected for far too long, and Leavitt wasn't done yet. She glanced back at the jury, at the judge's empty seat, and then at the defense table. "I believe we still have a trial to finish." But after what had just happened, everyone in that room knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom felt different now, lighter, as if the weight of years of corruption had been lifted in an instant. Judge Gates was gone, hauled out in cuffs, and the shock of it still lingered in the air like the final note of a symphony. Karoline Leavitt took her seat again, adjusting the papers in front of her. The trial wasn't over, not yet, but the biggest obstacle had just been removed. She turned her attention back to the defense table. Charles Lawson, the developer, had gone eerily quiet. His usual smugness had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. He was still trying to assess how much damage had been done, how much of his safety net, the safety net Lawson, had just been ripped away. Leavitt could see the wheels turning in his head. Without Gates on the bench, his legal team would have to argue the case on its own merits, and they had none. She leaned forward slightly, her tone calm but firm. "Mr. Lawson, would you like to continue with today's proceedings, or would you prefer to discuss a plea?" His jaw clenched. "This is a witch hunt," he spat. Leavitt gave a small smile. "No, Mr. Lawson, this is justice," he scoffed, shaking his head. "You think one corrupt judge changes anything? You think this means you win?" Leavitt didn't respond right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "I think it means the system still works," she said finally. "That no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, the truth will always catch up to them." Lawson exhaled sharply, but he had nothing left to say. The judge's seat remained empty, but it didn't matter. This case was no longer in his hands. The prosecution team exchanged glances, and one of Leavitt's colleagues leaned in. "This might be a good time to push for a deal," they suggested. Leavitt considered it, her eyes narrowing slightly as she weighed the options. She could feel the shift in the room. The jury's eyes were locked on her, waiting, watching. They had just witnessed something they'd never forget. But she wasn't about to let this end quietly. She stood. "Your Honor," she began, then paused, correcting herself to address the new presiding judge. "Given the events that have unfolded today, I'd like to formally request permission to proceed with additional evidence. It's clear now that a full investigation is necessary to uncover just how far this corruption reaches." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Leavitt pressed on, her voice unwavering. "Judge Gates was only part of the problem. If my team was able to uncover this much, it means there's more. More names. More people who believed they were untouchable." She turned sharply to Lawson, her gaze piercing. "So, I'll ask you, do you want to talk?" Leavitt asked again. Lawson sat rigid, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. He was weighing his options, the stakes clear in the silence that followed. Finally, he exhaled. "If I do, I want protection." Leavitt nodded slowly, her expression unyielding. "Then you better start talking." The courtroom was no longer the same place it had been an hour ago. The balance of power had shifted. The walls that once shielded the powerful had begun to crack, and Karoline Leavitt had sent a message to everyone watching. No one is above the law. As the bailiff called for order and the trial prepared to move forward, reporters in the back of the room scrambled to get their stories out. This wasn't just another case. This was history in the making, and it was only the beginning. The story of Karoline Leavitt teaches us a profound lesson. Justice prevails when courage confronts corruption. No matter how entrenched the power may seem, it's a reminder that systems, though flawed, can still bend toward truth when individuals refuse to back down. In life, we often face our own Judge Gates figures or obstacles that intimidate and obstruct. Yet, like Leavitt, we can choose to stand firm, armed with persistence and integrity, knowing the truth has a way of surfacing. This applies everywhere, in workplaces, communities, or personal battles. It's about holding the powerful accountable and believing one voice can spark change. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope it inspires you as much as it does me. Please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What's your takeaway? How do you fight for justice in your life? Let's keep the conversation going.